Okay, so moving on to our next, let's see who we've got. Tommy Teman. Let's bring him in. Dude,
Hey John, how's it going?
how are you, man?
Good, good. Nice to
So
be here
you're gonna
virtually.
give us an update on Portis.
Yes.
Fabulous. How you been?
Doing okay. It's crazy year, I guess, for everybody.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's pretty much the global answer, right? But that's good. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you the stage. Take it away.
thank you. Hey everyone. My name is Tom. I'm from Portis, and this talk is about how we're extending the Web3 provider so you can offer better user experience for your users. Basically, give them an experience which is similar to what they're used to, in regular web applications and not in this crazy world of crypto, which is very foreign to a lot of people. So first, a little bit about Portis. For those of you who are unfamiliar, so Portis came about when in January of 2018, and we saw that there was a problem in the space. MetaMask was pretty much the only option out there, and whenever someone wanted to use a new dApp, and dApps were very few at the time, but even the few that were there was like a list of instructions telling users, okay, you got to go install this extension, you got to get some crypto somewhere else, you got to transfer it. It's a whole spiel, and it's very, very, users are lazy, they don't care about blockchain, it should be simple for them. So we came up with a solution where we were very adamant about being self-custodial or non-custodial, depending on how you want to look at it. But basically, we are not holding anybody's private keys. What we do is instead of asking the user to install an extension, we offer the dApp developer themselves something they can add to their code, which will make sure users can use their existing browsers, not install anything, but still maintain absolute control over their private keys. We do this using end-to-end encryption, and if you're interested, you can go on our website at Portis.io and check out our white paper. Um, since then, we've grown to more than 150 dApps, including some very big ones that you probably all know, if it's Gitcoin, if it's Uniswap, if it's a host of other ones, and Gods Unchained, and also Shapeshift. And in April of last year, we were also acquired by Shapeshift. And it was, for us, the Shapeshift team, because they were so big on self-custodial as well, and they see it as a big part of like not your keys, not your crypto, etc. This was a great fit between both of our companies, and we really shared the same vision together on how blockchain should be. Going down the custodial path seems like a user experience shortcut in some way, but it does present, I think it's a step in the wrong direction because it's just going to bring back the same problems that we have in the world of Web 2, and it will eventually come back to bite us, where. So let's talk about Web 3. So Web 3 was originally, when Ethereum just started out, let's go back 2014, 2015, thinking about running Web 3 inside browsers was, that was very futuristic at the time. Back then, it was mostly for nodes on your server. You ran your own smart contract, you communicated from a server, managing private keys for mass adoption for users. That wasn't really much of a concern. And so, there is no user experience inside your Node.js. But when we move forward and we started wanting to have users, use decentralized applications, be it on their phone, be it on their browsers, wherever, there's a lot of unique user flows that don't really exist when you're running that private node that communicates with the blockchain, with the private keys that are, you can easily store private keys on your own private machine, or even if you're on something like AWS, that's been solved. But we want to store it on the client, and we have all of these flows which revolve around signing transactions and messages and whatnot. It becomes something which is basically new. We never had to deal with this in the world of web development or development in general, not really. So if you're running your own Node.js server with Web3, Like you have an algo trading machine, or you have a dApp, which is not really a dApp because it's a custodial. You're holding the private keys. You're just giving people an interface to access them, like Coinbase, or Facebook for that matter. Then that's not really a concern for you. But when we're talking about true dApps, if we're talking about stuff like I mentioned before, like Uniswap or other applications like that, then the whole fact of people holding their own coins and interacting with your smart contract, which is deployed on this global machine of Ethereum, then you want to make sure that you can account for those user flows in a way which doesn't add too much friction to your users. So enter Web3 provider. So on a very high level, what a Web3 provider does is basically wrap this Web3 instance, the same one you would have inside your Node.js server. And if you ever used Web3 inside, inside Node or whatever machine you prefer, Python, whatever, then Go or what be it, then it just basically offers this interface, right? To talk with the smart contract. You can query the blockchain, you can send transactions, you can manage, you can have create a wallet object that has the private keys and HD wallets and all of that goodness that you need to use this thing called a smart contract and interact with the blockchain. So Web3 provider is for solving that issue when you're using Web3 on a client. Now, Web3 provider is just like the word says, provider. There is someone who provides you this. Could it be MetaMask? Could it be Portis? Could it be any other kind of Web3 solution that runs that is more than just a wallet? It's not just about storing the private key. That's a big part of it. But you also want to be able to interact with those private keys in a more sophisticated manner. And there's more than just that. You maybe just want to query the blockchain. You want to get the latest block, the metadata on it. You want to get a specific block. You want to get a specific transaction hash, whatever. Just reading the blockchain. That's also something that a Web3 provider is obligated to provide to you if they want to be a standard provider. And so that's what a web provider is. And like I mentioned, the big thing here is you don't want to expose the private keys to anyone else besides the provider. Now, if it's MetaMask or Portis, then the private keys are not exposed to the provider itself. Some providers are custodial in some way, and then the private keys are exposed to them, but most are not, or they offer semi-custodianship or all kinds of interesting ways to solve this whole problem of managing a user's private key. Is a big challenge, and there's a lot of different interesting approaches to handle it, and it's a very interesting space by itself. So when we're talking about giving users this capability of being able to manage their private key, sign transactions, do it all inside their client, there's always this kind of balance. And for us at Portis, that has been something we've been tackling from day one, is how do you balance the security and the usability of your users in a way which, makes sense? Because on the one hand, you have the power user, and most people here listening to this call are probably power users. They feel comfortable with private keys and hashes and twiddling with nonsense and gas fees and whatnot. On the other hand, you have the mainstream user, which could be really intimidated by all of that. And they're used to the world of Web2, which is like Venmo, which is like Facebook, which is very simple, just like maybe 2 lines of text, approve, and that's it. And we're always trying to find this right balance. And it's challenging, and different apps have different needs. But if we do truly want to reach mainstream adoption, we have to make sure that we're not just geared for the power users. If we always keep that mindset of the power users, we're gonna have problems. It's a known issue in new technologies. For when games just started out, like Nintendo's and whatnot, then there was a problem there that a lot of the people who were testers were really good gamers. So there were some notoriously difficult games that came out in the early days because the people testing them kind of had, were kind of blind to the fact that not all people are spending 10 hours a day playing this game and will be able to handle it. Most will just get frustrated and will just rage quit. Same here. If you're just assuming everybody feels comfortable about all kinds of cryptographic terms and being super technical, they're just gonna not use your application because it's just way too complicated for them. On the other hand, you also want to make sure that the power users can feel comfortable if they want to, and also that you're not making it too simple in a way which could be maybe abused by either malicious dApps or any other way that maliciousness could be exploited. So to do that, Portis, what we do, Portis is a standard Web3 provider, which means that when you're integrating Portis, and when I'll get to a code example, you see how simple it is. It's just 2 lines of code because it's a standard Web3 provider. So if you're using MetaMask, or something else, then you can just replace that 1 line of code, and everything works the same. The things that I want to cover in this conversation is what are we extending beyond the Web3 provider for the various user experience flows that we have seen so far. And we're also improving that as we move forward. Something also to keep in mind about a Web3 provider in general, and I mentioned it before, is that there's 2 parts to it. And a good way to think about it is as an authenticated methods and non-authenticated methods. So if you want to get the users get accounts, for instance, to call Web3 get accounts, or if you want the user to sign a transaction, sign a message, anything that requires either exposing the user's identity, which is get account, or his private keys, well, that requires authentication. And this is something that will differ from provider to provider. I mentioned MetaMask, they store it on your machine locally. With Portis, we encrypt it, store it in the cloud encrypted, and then send it back to you decrypted. So for you to decrypt it and with your password, so giving you this cloud experience, but remaining custodian. There's a lot of other providers out there as well, Taurus, Formatic, whoever, and they all have their different approaches to storing, to managing the authentication. The other part is the non-authenticated methods, and that's something that a provider is also obligated to provide to you. What it means is that, for instance, you can use a provider without ever seeing the login screen, in theory. So you can initialize the provider, if, let's say, not MetaMask because you're assuming the user has it, but if you're using Portis, you can initialize Portis, never call something like get accounts or sign transaction, just call methods like get network ID, for instance, or get block number, or all of these queries to the blockchain were basically read-only, and you will never see Portis in theory. Now, one of the optimizations we recently did in our latest version, moving from 3, when we moved from Portis SDK 2 to Portis SDK 3, we made quite a big optimization there. We got some complaints from our developers. It was a little bit too coupled, everything. So it meant that even if you were using Portis as a read-only solution, you were still getting we were automatically trying to log the user in, et cetera. So we kind of make a differentiation which optimized both the speed and also it made sure that until you're actually logging in a user, we don't load a lot of the data. So anyone who's used Portis and was kind of, maybe upset by seeing a lot of API calls getting called in the background because of it, we really optimize everything there. We also remove amplitude completely. That was also something that we never use personal data for anything. We're not doing anything like that. But still, some dApps were feeling uncomfortable, especially in this world of decentralization, where any information was being collected under the user, even if it was used for benign reasons, just so we can make sure that we can see which features are getting used more or less. We realize that we will have to find other ways of getting that metrics. Maybe we'll reintroduce it in the future with some sort of like approval by the user itself, if they approve doing that. We still haven't decided if that's something that's worth doing. But this is part of the things that we're doing behind the scenes, trying to make sure that we're optimizing everything. So both we can offer you a better user experience for your users, but also make sure we're not doing it at the sake of performance or privacy, etc. So what are we offering? Like, what does Portis offer in addition? So first of all, I encourage everybody who's planning to build with Portis during this hackathon. And by the way, anybody who has a live dApp working for the hackathon, like hosted live, which has Portis integrated. And to be clear, you can use Portis directly, or if you're using any of the solutions like Web3 Model or Web3 React, I think that's the other one, or Block Native, where you can use Portis, but other providers as well. That counts as well. We're not going to tell you to use, as long as Portis is a login option, you get $100 worth of ETH as a prize. And the favorite dApps, the dApps that we think are good, will actually even be posted, publicized on our app store at apps.portis.io. And the top one, our top favorite, will get a blog post, and we'll really kind of cover it and talk to you and want to really dig into what was done there and how Portis helped you reach, a good user experience for your users. So when you initialize Portis, and I want to cover 3 things there that are interesting. So the first thing that you have is something called scope. Now, scope is sorry. So scope is, you're probably familiar with the concept of scope if you ever used Facebook OAuth or Google OAuth. You know how you log into Facebook or Google and the pop-up window says, hey, this application wants access to your profile picture, email, whatever. So these are kind of, again, Web2 user experience things that we're used to. So we wanted to offer that as well. So we have 2 parameters there. The first one is reputation. I wouldn't recommend using it at the moment. It used to have a lot more meaning back when we had payment processors that allows us to use an API, so we could really have more information about if users validated their purchasing, etc. So the idea behind reputation was that you're doing an airdrop, you're logging the user. You don't want to give that airdrop just to anybody, or you're sponsoring their gas fees with the gas station network, which is another feature we have that I will get to later on. So you want to make sure you're only giving that to people that are reputable, that have an actual account, and you're not getting bombarded just by some sort of a Sybil attack. So we allowed you to ask the user to share their reputation with you, but at the moment, we're working on making this more meaningful. So that's less interesting. The other interesting scope parameter is something called email, which, as it means, you're just asking the user to share their email with you. Now, this is useful, I think, for a big pitfall that I see with dApps where they have their own login mechanism on top of asking the user to log in with Web3. And that's a terrible user experience. You go into any application in the world Web2, you don't have to log in twice, right? Now, you can use your Web3 provider, and it doesn't have to be just Portis. You can use your Web3 provider as your authentication method. Basically, you ask the user to log in with their Web3 method, and then you sign a message or something equivalent so you can verify, for that specific session. There's a host of blog posts using a Web3 provider as your login mechanism. I highly recommend you do that. But the reason we give you the email through the scope, and what it means that when the user logs in, the screen will show, hey, this application also wants access to your email, and you can approve or decline, is that the application can then also have access to the user's email. Because a lot of the times we saw the dApps were having this separate login mechanism just because they wanted to have a way to, independently communicate with their users later on. So if they have their email through us, that's all they need basically. And now they can only have one login mechanism, which is obviously much nicer. And so that's scope. So I recommend using that and passing in the email. If the user doesn't agree to share their email, then they won't get your newsletter, but that's always their prerogative. The other option is network. So network is, as it means, like which network do you want to connect to? If it's mainnet, if it's one of the test nets, or the host of EVM compatible blockchains that we support, if it's POA, if it's Matic, if it's Thunder Core, and again, the full list is on our documentation. And I'll touch on network later on. We also have something a little bit more interesting for that, and I think that's really interesting for layer 2 right now, where everybody's, wants to kind of move between them, between the networks. And the last one is dApp ID. So dApp ID is when you set up your Portis application, you need to pass in, when you initialize the Portis object, you need to pass in a dApp ID. What the dApp ID does is allow you to kind of set up your logo and all kinds of different information. So when the user logs in, they will see your dApp logo. And there's also a security aspect to it where you're telling us which domain your dApp should run on. And I won't touch on that because we're short on time, but just make sure you set it up. Okay, so moving on. So we have some methods. I won't go over all of them because we have around 10 minutes left, but I'll touch on the more important ones. So I'll start with change network because I really want to make sure we cover that. So and this will trigger a code example here, and you can check it out later. So let me kind of show what's going on here. So and I'm not sure if you can properly see my screen. Let me kind of try and see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, I hope that's big enough. So first of all, let me show you how you initialize Portis. So when you initialize Portis, you pass in the dApp ID. We start off on Rinkeby, and then you just create your Web3 object with the Portis provider. That's it. You got Web3, standard Web3 stuff. Now, the code here is not that interesting, but this call is what's interesting. So we got a standard like React form here. You can check it out. It's not nothing too fancy here. But what we're doing, when you change to a different network, you see when I click on send here on mainnet, then I'm going to be sending, well, first it will want me to log in, and I'm already logged in to an account I created for this demo. So this is like our quick login. The user will just log in easily. And what it will ask me is to send 0.1 Ether to myself, but I don't have I have insufficient funds. By the way, you'll notice I can complete this with Banksa. Go to checkout. This is our direct purchase feature, which which we also have, and I mentioned and I'm mentioning later on. I'm not sure we're going to have a lot of time to talk about it. Basically, it allows the user to kind of complete everything in one flow instead of asking them to go buy some Ether, come back, click again. This makes it a little bit more, makes it a little nicer and more familiar. But you see, this is on the Ethereum main network, and if I click on, let's say, Matic, and I want to send some Matic testnet. So when I click send, you'll see that I'm now sending on Matic some Mumbai test token, and I do have a few. It shows that I have the zero balance because it's a test network token, so we don't show balance to it, so it might be a little bit confusing, but I am able to confirm it now. And well, it doesn't really, I didn't create any UI for this, but here's the hex of the transaction hash, sorry. So you can check that on the Mumbai test network and see that it went through. So the interesting bit here is this change network, which allows you to change the network the user is on while they're using the application. This lets you do stuff like move between layer 1 and layer 2 very easily for your users and create a very smooth experience for them. So I just wanted you to make sure you're aware of this, because I know a lot of you are going to be building on Matic, and sometimes you want the user to do a lot of cool stuff on Matic, but then move back to main network where they're kind of moving the, let's say, the assets that have the real value, because that's where you have like ETH or NFTs that are already there. Although I know that OpenSea recently integrated Matic into NFTs, so I'm really curious to see where that will take us. A lot of other couple methods that are interesting. Show Portis. So Show Portis is when you click on it, and a lot of those have code example in our doc, so you can just kind of test it out for yourself. Show Portis opens like this small window on the top right in our iframe that shows you like which email the user is logged into and what's their wallet address, what's their balance, all of that. And I noticed that some developers use that to log in the user, like using that to trigger the login. I don't recommend it personally. If you need to trigger a login, just use the standard Web3 enable or use Web3 get accounts, and then call show Portis. Like a lot of dApps, for instance, will have once you log in, it will tell you like the user address on the top right. So maybe bind to that. So when the user clicks on that, that will trigger the show Portis. I just think it's not the greatest user experience that once you log in, there's something additional you need to close to use the application. Just like a tip. Set default email. I won't cover that. It's useful for specific dApps. Logout allows you to just log out the user. Import wallet. If some applications want to create a wallet on the client side, import them into the user's account so they can, sign transactions and whatnot with them, but then also have the user's personal wallet to kind of communicate between both. This could also be useful for some layer 2 solutions. You want to create like a wallet for the user for some reason, or maybe you have all kinds of like using Create2 or all kinds of interesting things that dApps are using this for. Is logged in, just useful for some user flows to figure out if the user is logged in or not for you inside your dApp. And so we also have some event handlers, which are pretty straightforward on login. This is, by the way, on login is where you will get the user's email if you ask for it in the scope. That's where you will have that in the callback. On logout, also useful to know if the user logged out. It will also trigger if the user has Portis on a different app, like the wallet open on a different tab, and they log out there, you will also get that callback. So in case you won't ask them not to sign a transaction, it will trigger another login. It just gives you better control. And that's what we're trying to give the developers, more control so they can create user experience that are more Web 2 feeling. On active wallet change, Portis allows you to have multiple wallets. So again, if the user changed their active wallet inside another tab, this will trigger and you will see if it changed. On error, just if there's like some sort of error not related to signed transaction, just kind of any error out there, that can happen. And finally, we have some features that are gonna be super useful, and we have some blog posts on them in our. If you go to Portis.io, you can reach our Medium page and read all about them. Gas Relay is about the gas station network, which we're integrated, allow you to sponsor gas fees for your users. Trust this app. Well, this used to be a lot more useful when gas fees were around a couple of cents each, because we're limiting this to $1 per hour in gas fees. What it does, a user, if they say they trust your application, they don't have to confirm every transaction if it has no value, like the parameter value is empty. But even then, we limit it to $1 per hour of gas, because we're not really worried about malicious apps. It's more about mistakes. Like a DApp might have an error where they go into a loop and suddenly they clean you out dry with the gas fees. Now with gas fees being around like $50 or $100, it's less useful for transactions, but it's super useful for messages. We saw this getting used a lot in games where if the user has, if the developer needs the user to sign a lot of messages, because a lot of games work that way, they don't want you to sign transactions, they want you to sign messages. Turning this on will mean that the user doesn't have to confirm every time. It will just show a notification, a toast notification, you sign a message, you sign a message. So that's super useful for anybody building any games or something of that nature. Direct purchase, I mentioned before with banks, that allows you to have this kind of quick and way of, for users, if they just started out, they don't have any Ether, they just click on a button, it pulls them into banks, they complete the purchase, and then they go back and it automatically fires the transaction as soon as the money is inside their wallet. So they don't have to do this back and forth. I think that's all the time we have. Check out our Twitter, our documentation, and our Telegram if you have any questions during your build. We're here for you. We want to help. We want to make sure you can have the best build in this hackathon. And yeah, thank you very much.
Tom, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you got it. Well, we see you in the, what time zone are you in right now? Are you in Israel?
Yeah, in Tel Aviv. It's 10 p.m. here now.
I was going to say, we probably won't see you at the virtual castle this afternoon, but maybe tomorrow morning.
Yeah, possibly. I wish we could all be there, like
the virtual castle, go check out, if you haven't been to the GamerChat booth yet, go to the Portis and Shapeshift booth. There's insane amounts of cool things. I'm sure you'll see Tom and everybody else there. So everybody go see Tom. So Tom's going to be there tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay.
Yeah, Scott showed me around. It looks super cool.
All right, cool. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, John.
See ya.